Well, welcome. This is season 2, episode 2 of Welcome to the Green Zone. I am Adam Kahn, one of the original members of the Netradyne team, and I have some really special guests with us today. My colleague, the other Adam, or the better Adam, whichever you want to sort of look at, and we've invited one of our great peers and friends in the industry, Roger Nicholson, to join us today. I think today, we have a couple of things to talk about. One, certainly the NFL season started, and Adam Lang is on the edge of his seat wanting to talk about his Vikings, which are off to an incredibly exciting start. But as we think about the session that we have today, it's in the headlines. It's everyone's talking about it every time we get together as an industry. It's all the overhead that is impacting fleet productivity, fuel prices, driver shortages, downtime, accidents, claims. And I'm really, really happy to have this audience here because I am humbled by the experience that's on this line. I certainly have a number of years in the technology space, but between Adam and Roger, I won't even count the years of fleet experience that we have here. So I think it's going to be a great conversation today. I want to quickly introduce Adam Lang, my co-host, to say hello, and we can kind of kick off the session here.
Thanks, Adam. I don't know if I'm the better Adam. I might disagree with you on that, but I appreciate your kind words. Adam Lang here, multiple years in fleet management, HR, safety, passionate about safety for trucking companies. The goal is to get everybody back home at the end of the day, and that's why we're here. And that's what we're going to talk about. And talk about some of those operational efficiencies with our guest today, Roger Nicholson. So Roger, could you please introduce yourself for our viewers?
Yeah, I'm currently the executive vice president for AWL Transport. We're a steel hauler based out of Northeast Ohio. We've got about 11 locations around the United States. My background is, I used to be in the auto industry back in the old days when Jimmy Hoffa was still around. So I am a gray hair, and spent a lot of time as a consultant for IBM, as well as, managing transportation companies, predominantly in the steel business. We're a heavy haul steel kind of company.
Roger, I'm fighting every urge to talk about Jimmy Hoffa days right now with you because I can't get enough of the movie genre around anything with Robert De Niro portraying Jimmy Hoffa and the whole storyline and the mystery that still goes on it. But it certainly carries an interesting storyline of like how fleets like when you have first started in the industry to the complexity and the technologies and the all the things you have to think about today versus maybe when you first started. I'm certainly very interested in things like how fuel efficiency and routing has kind of evolved. The vehicles certainly are much more technologically advanced. Mm-hmm. I grew up. My father worked for Ford Heavy Truck, and the TL 9000 was the cab overs, and you had to manually tune the engine. Where now you can't even touch an engine without sophisticated machinery, and then just the pressures of remaining competitive. I'm interested in picking your brain a little bit. Like, just maybe we can start 1, 2, 3 on those topics. But I think there's this growing synergy that's happening between the driver performance, safety, fuel management, maintenance, keeping the vehicle uptime and delivering on promise. I'd like to pick your brain maybe a little bit on the evolution of all three of those, if you don't mind. Maybe start with fuel.
Well, I go back a long ways. I go back in the industry over 50 years. So for me, the old days, there was a lot of lip service to things. I'll use safety, whether it's safety or economy or maintenance of things. It was done because it had to get done, but it was just a different environment. That now has evolved into it's part of it. Really is part of the business. You can't run a trucking company without being safe. That's one of the reasons we've had a long-standing involvement with Netradyne, because our staff, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes enthusiastically, have learned that at the end of the day, you got to get a load delivered and you got to get a load picked up and you got to get the right rate from the customer. But you're not allowed to kill people anymore. Back in the 70s, when I was involved, in Detroit area, it was a tough crowd up there. Things were very different. You walked into an assembly plant, they were filthy. The floor, you couldn't walk on the floors without stumbling over something. Go to an assembly plant now and walk through it, get a tour. They have a great tour up at the Ford plant up in Dearborn. You'll go in there, you can look at the floor.
Is that the same plant with the living roof?
Yeah,
I've been there. It's really, part of the tour, not only is it super clean, like you could eat your lunch off the floor, but the sustainability of those plants are like they have all the greenery to cool the plant, naturally and organically. I've been at that plant.
It's very different. And, for our staff, fuel economy is a good example. We as a company, we're heavy haul steel guys. We put 80,000 on the deck, sometimes 120,000 on the deck. When I worry about something historically at our company, I'm worried about finding a way to get the trailer to be 5 pounds lighter so I can put 5 more pounds of steel on the deck or building materials or whatever the item might be.
Roger, I wanted to quick say now with fuel efficiency and what you're doing with your loads, do you notice a correlation with the drivers that are more fuel efficient? Do they happen to be safer as well, or is that not always the case?
Yeah, I think so. We've just started a huge program here because one of our vendors that we use now has a very sophisticated capability in the area of fuel efficiency monitoring. They were in the forefront of developing, the technology for Formula One vehicles. So they took that development that they did on Formula One cars to figure out how fast the car could go, how far the car could go, how much fuel it would use based on how they were accelerating or what the air drag was in a particular corner on the track, and turned that over to trucking. And because of that change and us taking advantage, they're very sophisticated. They're monitoring 40 different conditions in the truck at a time. They can tell me if it's snowing outside. They can tell if, snow or rain is causing a drag on my load. They can tell how hard my driver is accelerating, climbing a hill or going down a hill. The significance of that now for a company like ours is I really can measure things. Not only can I measure things in the general scale of what my miles per gallon is for my fleet, but I can tell by individual vendor trucks and individual vendor engines and transmissions exactly the fuel economy for those vehicles. For us, as we're evolving as a company and we're going through some changes, we now have the capability to look at a particular vendor. I would have never looked at these vendors. Somebody said, hey, I want to buy this particular company. Their truck is $10,000 more than the next guy on a best day. Yeah. Every driver wants them, and every owner doesn't want to buy them because I know it makes me the same amount of money as the one that cost me $10,000 more. Why would I do that? In steel hauling, for us, we never looked at fuel economy. Now I can measure, and for the first time in our career here, we now have one of those vendors that charges a lot more for their truck and has told us for all these years how much more fuel efficient it is. And we just, sure, whatever. We just didn't believe it.
Hey, Roger, not to interrupt. I just want to remind our audience too, please, if you want to put comments in and ask questions, please do so. I neglected to do that last time on our last podcast, so I wanted to throw it out there. Sorry for killing the flow.
No, I think it's very interesting the point you're making, Roger, because I think that's certainly a trend that I'm seeing where the efficiencies start to blend in, where you can get a much more holistic view of all things that the driver does and all things that the vehicle is doing, right? So it's not a single decision anymore. It's a driver who, that their efficiency of on-time delivery, safety, and fuel management, it's all baked into one view, where now you also couple that with the assignment of the vehicle type, the specs of the engine, the maintenance intervals, the uptake, and the routing of that system all now become a much more integrated experience. And having that information into one view, now there's tremendous efficiencies about versus stitching together multiple reports and questioning the confidence of one data set over the other data set. So I'm really encouraged by where I see technology. Certainly Netradyne is invested into that space about how to start to combine all those elements together. But it's always great to hear it from the other side of the supplier side, on the vendor side, saying, hey, this is a requirement, a must-have versus a nice-to-have anymore.
Well, you got to be safe. I can't run my business. Like I said, they won't let you kill people no more. It's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable. And it isn't that they let you kill them. It's that they sometimes look the other ways and said, well, those things happen. Unfortunately, they happen. They can't happen anymore. Not one time.
No.
Right.
You can't hurt somebody now. It's not an okay thing for the public. And, if I've got my driver doing something wrong, we're finding that all of these different categories of things we monitor, it's that guy, the guy who does really, really safe things and has really good fuel efficiency and has his truck not breaking down because he's doing his pre-trip check. Those are all conditions that prove to me that guy's the guy. And the guys that aren't those guys, we have to fix them. In the past, the attitude would be, well, you get rid of them and hire somebody else. I had 400 applicants this month. I could hire a small fraction of them because of their driving records, their work history, all those other things. I have to have systems now to monitor that. But now I've got to have the tools in the truck. We've got the ability for hours of service. I can get online with the driver in the truck. And when he's looking at his hours of service on his little chart on his tablet, I can get on the tablet with him and point out, hey, look, you did this here and this isn't acceptable. And here's what you could have done. And that's probably from a safety point of view, the big evolution that the safety departments now, they're not sitting there and just yelling them, spanking them for it. They're getting on the tablet with them and saying, let me show you what you could have done. Let me show you how you could have done your 8 and 2 split.
More coaching. Safety is
more education with the driver to make him a better driver. They're a commodity we just don't have hanging out there. Every once in a while, one of them's got to go away.
Yeah.
But you can't run a company thinking that way anymore. You just can't.
Well, Roger, before you had mentioned that you're an old gray hair, I'm certainly entering in that space. You can see from this, tight, haircut that I have. But I always think about, I get more mail from AARP and, planning for retirement than I know what to do with. But I also think about those commercials, the follow the green line, right? If you just follow the green line, everything will be fine. The interesting pieces, and it just, I was just thinking about this as you were telling the story about how to interact with drivers. we have so much information now. Like, it's not a scolding anymore. It's, let me show you the best path and where you are with relation to that path,
Right.
which, I think, the highlight you just sort of showcased was the importance of engagement in a positive way, right? Let me show you what best in class looks like. Let me show you how close you are. Man, if you're on that path, I'm going to give you a high five, and, I'm going to leave you alone and just keep on doing what you're doing. But, the moment that someone kind of deviates a little bit, you're right. I mean, I think it's instead of telling them what they're doing wrong, it's how do you get them back on that trajectory, which we all know is proven. So, it's really. Do you have any kind of competitions, or, how do you get your drivers to sort of self motivate, or, kind of compete against each other? Is there a special hat or a vest or a patch, or
we give them money.
That always works.
We have a wonderful jacket, leather jacket we give out the end of the year for our top guys who get our safety awards, and that's kind of been a carry on forever. But we've tried really hard to take the drivers and motivate them to run a little harder, but you got to run a little safer. You got to not break down. You got to tell us when something's wrong. In our area, especially, we're hauling aluminum coils. If that aluminum coil gets put on the truck wrong, that's kind of a problem. If it's damaged getting on the truck or on the trailer, it's going to be damaged at the other end, believe me.
Oh, yeah.
So the idea is, we've got a really good program where a driver lets us know that, hey, there's something wrong here. We take pictures of it. They submit it to safety. The shipper says, no, it's okay. I'm telling you, it's okay. Just go ahead and take it. We get to the other end. When that guy says, I don't know what he was thinking. It's not okay. My guy's got pictures. My safety department's already talked to them. And we know that it's been caught. We have the highest level of those drivers reporting those things. I think at the end of a quarter or a half a year, we give out a huge Yeti cooler to a driver, one of the really big choices that they have. But, through the course of a month, we give money. I mean, our drivers can make, up to $15,000 a year in bonuses. But they got to be safe.
Really impressive.
At the end of the day, they got to be safe.
So they have to be safe, Roger. Do they have to do anything with maintenance related, fuel related, or is it a total package? Like they have to be safe. Then you look at their operational efficiency, their maintenance efficiency, their fuel efficiency. How does it kind of look?
Well, we're beginning to bring in fuel efficiency now. The vendor that we have has an in-cab capability where the driver can see how he's doing as far as his use of cruise control, his use of acceleration, a few other things. And he can get immediate feedback of whether if he's climbing a hill and he pushes down on the pedal all the way, the system's smart enough to know that's okay. But as that grade starts to change, him stomping on that pedal when there's no need to, or he's maxed out on the pedal, it's smart enough to tell him not to do that. And we've started to implement some programs with selected groups of drivers as the initial phase, that if they are being more fuel efficient, they get to take advantage of a discount. We give them a piece of that money we save.
That's a great motivator right there.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting piece, what you just, to summarize a little bit, is it's more context, right? You could have the safest driver, but safe sometimes is an exchange for, to your point of stomping on the pedal, when you don't need to. And, I think that combination of the total performance, I think, starts to, have another look at certain drivers, right? So you really want to have safe and efficient.
Well, we're an insurance captive, and our insurance captive is tough. We're in one of the highest rated insurance captives there are. But, our rating has improved every year because our drivers are participating in the program. I've got, if I was to talk to my CFO, he wouldn't be so thrilled to find out that, 80% of my drivers are getting those bonuses.
Yeah.
It's like crazy. We never thought we would get to that level. I'm giving away more money now in that program.
In that program aspect, do you like when you see that 80% marker, which certainly, like you just said that number, that blew my hair back a little bit. Is there now, like, all right, you hit this one goal, now we go to this next goal and we go to the next goal, or how do you sustain, like I always see, like you have like these goals, and if you keep hitting them, people figure out how to, hit that goal with the minimum amount of effort. I mean, from a tracking perspective, are you thinking about how to push the team even, to the next level of excellent performance?
Well, it's performance based. So it's kind of like a sales commission for you, for you guys at your company. Right. You don't get to get that money just because you're safe every day. You got to work hard.
Right.
So the level of work that they've got to do to achieve those 1, 2, or 3% increase in their pay, they're got to run pretty hard. It's not inconsequential. They're not sitting at a truck stop playing tiddlywinks.
Right.
They're on the road running. And and they've got a tough job. I mean, they got a tough job. We all don't know that many people that want to do that job.
Yeah.
It's who wants to go to the bathroom in a public place every day? Who wants to sleep on a mattress in an enclosed truck? That's a good point. It's a tough thing that we need to understand. We got to have ways to make it better for them. And the better we can do to make sure the truck runs all the time, to put technology in the vehicle so the driver can check his tires. I know some of these guys don't do pre-trips. I'm not an idiot. Well, it depends who you talk to. But I've got to put technology in there to help them
help themselves, right?
To make up for that.
I wonder, Roger, because a couple of years ago, one of the trade organizations asked me to do a speech, and they said, we want you to tell the story about how drivers, how to best practices in having drivers adopt technology. And I said, that's a trap question, because if you all of a sudden decide to call your drivers and treat them as one being, you're making a mistake. And in fact, my presentation was, I think I profiled 7 different drivers in my presentation. I'm sure that there's more, but like just on the range of someone who's been driving and, like leave me alone, all the way to the engineer who now wants to be a driver and comes back and he's reprogrammed your OBC, just because he's bored.
Sure.
I wonder if you might share a couple hints or tricks on like best practices in getting drivers used to, or like, want to be part of the program, knowing that you have some early adopters, some, the general pops, and then the laggards.
We've, I don't want to say it's across the board, but, when you get a group of guys who are out on the road all month or all week, and they're now having to be brought into a meeting on a Saturday morning, eating mediocre eggs and mediocre sausage and mediocre cold potatoes, no matter how much we try to make it right.
Yeah, Adam, this isn't an invitation. I know you just got really excited about that breakfast, but you're not included.
It's no matter how good the breakfast is, they don't want to be there. They want to be home with their family.
Yes.
So you always get a person or two in a room that, is that guy or girl. And, I call it puffery. They got to get attention, and they got to poke the bear and pump their chest out that, hey, look, this is how a real driver does it. And we've found that in most cases, trying to get them into smaller groups has worked for us. Okay. Because we know for a fact, nobody wants to get anybody hurt. Nobody wants to hurt somebody when they're driving down the road. There's absolutely no good for a driver to bump into something he makes no more money by doing that. For us, probably the biggest push we do now is trying to help a driver understand when you get there, you're going to sit. So what's the purpose of speeding? What's the purpose of being in? Why get upset with the other drivers? This isn't going to get any better. That's probably the biggest frustration we see with drivers is just the aggravation of the people on the road, especially with all the construction there's been this year. And, they're seeing, their pay is being affected by our customers who are trying to protect themselves from this the economic uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And they got nothing else to do but vent. They can't control it. And they're the ones that get kicked, even though they're working a lot of hours compared to working at a McDonald's or working at a assembly plant. These guys are away from their families 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some of the people in the audience are gone for weeks. We have certain divisions of our company where they're gone for a month at a time. I mean, you got to do something to help them get control of their emotions and just take a deep breath.
Yeah.
So, we found by doing it, I won't say one-on-one, but maybe as small groups, that's really the guys that are able to embrace that and able to understand you got to do what you got to do. You have, the customer requires certain things. It's out of my control. You got to make sure your trucks, you're there on time. In order to get there on time, you got to do a pre-trip because when you break down, you don't save time when you break down. Oh. It could be you could lose a day's pay, and I'm willing to pay you for that.
Yeah, I like what you said earlier, Roger, about having the drivers participate in the savings, because I think that's super meaningful. About it's not an endless well of cash that you can hand out, but I've also found out in my career, with safety systems and telematics systems, that the more that the team believes in the objective, the easier it is to hit results, and versus telling someone versus teaching. And in this case, I just want to echo the statement you made earlier about, if we save monies, I'm willing to give that money back to the driver because they're one of the main catalysts of that savings. So I think that's super powerful.
Well, hey, Con, you bring this up too. Somebody wise once said, you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't measure what you can't see. So with all the data that we get or that you get, Roger, in your organization, in terms of safety numbers, of course, you can use our system for GreenZone. You can look at your fuel efficiencies. You can look at your miles driven, operational efficiencies, all sorts of different metrics. How often do you share that with your fleet? Are you pretty open about sharing information like in aggregate? I'm not saying everybody's numbers are out there for every driver to see, but are you sharing some bigger picture numbers with your fleet so that they can kind of be a part of that success?
Yeah, we do periodically. The problem, we're privately held, so there's certain things that the owners don't want to have all over the world.
Sure.
But one-on-one or in small groups with the drivers, there's almost nothing we won't talk to them about from an efficiency point of view or a maintenance point of view. We've got a really great safety department, that works with our maintenance department. They do a great job. We do outside repairs at our facilities. I probably got in one time in our location here in Northeast Ohio, I've got more outside trucks than my inside trucks. And that's because they're staying on top of them.
Yep.
They do a great job. They're dedicated. They care. And, I think most of the drivers, we're predominantly a company fleet. Probably 70% of our drivers are company drivers versus independent contractors. But, we have a large fleet of trailers that support some certain parts of that business. Most of our drivers are one trailer, one truck. But they got to be working. I can't get a guy to run if he doesn't have a truck working. My volume of complaints about maintenance has dropped like a rock because we're on that every day. If I have a monitoring system for tire inflation as an example, that the computer sends alert to my maintenance team every day of here's any truck that's in the fleet or trailer that has low tire inflation. If there's one thing in a heavy haul environment that's critical, I can't have a low tire because that low tire is going to burst and then it's going to pop all the rest of the tires. And if I'm in, Southern Ohio in Nowhereville, where am I going to get those tires at 2 a.m? Our volume of breakdowns now for those things is negligible in the scheme of things from what we historically have been because of using technology to be on top of that.
So guys, I want to take an opportunity first to remind our audience that please ask questions, leave comments. I've got a great comment that I want to just share with one of our viewers, Richmond Key. Creating great culture is always the key, no pun intended for Richmond, building a great safety program. Drivers will be successful when they feel they're a part of a valued team and the entire organization behind those safety standards. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you very much, Richmond, for that. And everybody else, again, if you have questions, float them out there.
Yeah, Adam, I was just thinking about, I was going to ask Roger if he had any key takeaways, and he stole my thunder because I think that the summary you just provided of the interchange between safety and operational efficiency and keeping the vehicles uptime, especially with Richmond's comments, I think those are all great ways to sort of end this podcast because, I just think, if somebody's listening or you hear the stream later on, those are great takeaways to remember that drivers are a valuable resource. They are humans. They have families. But that interchange between, safety, fuel, efficiency, maintenance is so important these days to get great results. And, it is super encouraging, Roger, you telling me that the relationship you have with your drivers is interactive in that process. And I want to thank you for the time spent with us. I always learn many, many things when we sit down and talk. And Adam Lang, I enjoy spending time with you, and I look forward to our next episode, next week. And thank you, everyone, for listening.
Hey, appreciate it. And hey, to finish it out, another dad joke. So, guys, because it's football season, why did the coach go to the bank? Give up?
Yeah.
To get his quarterback. And on that note, I think we can end it. And Adam, Roger, it was awesome.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.